welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to do a follow-on to our previous topic of what do you do when you've got a difficult person who's resisting the transformation. Lucci has a question, and we're going to do a deep dive. So over to you, Lucci.
Thank you, Lear. Yes, I was wondering how to handle a person that is obstructing, like I don't know how the team is working or the process that you are trying to implement, and that is not like a healthy, did you call it a healthy I don't know the other word, but when it is unhealthy, right? And you aren't able to find a way to get the buy-in of this person and to commit to this change. What happens with that? Would the culture of the team would expel that person naturally? Would that person move aside, like say, okay, I can't work here, I would go, I don't know, to another organization, or I would like to work in another team? What is your experience with this type of people?
It depends on the overall culture of the organization. In an orange organization, what you just described would probably happen. Because the folks, so we talked about this in the last video, the folks who are going to not respond to data, if you're coming in as a coach and you have good data and you're able to show empirically like how what you're doing is better, any data-driven person is going to get on board. The folks who are not data-driven are going to be your ambers. And they're going to be wedded to whatever, we're doing things this way because we've always done that way. If there's a green overall culture, green leaders don't know what to do with an intractable amber. They don't know how to call them out. And what I've seen in the past, I've seen this over and over again, and I'm curious to hear other people's experiences, but they're just like, oh yeah, that's just how that person is.
I do find myself often, and I've always been very interested in game theory, and I don't know how much you guys know about game theory. Probably the prisoner's dilemma stands out, of people cooperating and not cooperating, and there's a lot of simulations which are like for aggressive animals and non-aggressive animals, and when you've got 100 reds and 100 greens, then at the start the reds start taking over, but then they start infighting and then the greens come back. Is there any kind of like movement patterns? Maybe it's a bit too specialized now, but are there any kind of movement patterns that you've noticed where, for example, you have a green organization, you put in 3 ambers, the ambers spread out and start taking over because the greens fall away, but then there's too many ambers and they start fighting, and then the more passive greens start rising to the top again? Are there any kind of like noticeable dynamics that you've seen like that?
No, because there's a difference between the culture of the organization and the values of the individuals. So an organization can have a green culture where only 10% of the individuals are green. And there's no way to affect cultural change without affecting the way the leaders are defining what the culture is supposed to be. So when I say there's a green culture, it might not be evidenced in people are acting in a green fashion, but green modalities of what is or is not acceptable are being followed.
So Leo, I've got a couple of real world examples of what I've seen happen, and I want to kind of get your take on it as it relates to Integral. So I've worked in a couple of organizations, one where there was at the start of the big change, there was a broadcast that the organization was guaranteeing job security, not role security. So they weren't going to be unemployed, but they might not necessarily be able to work in the same role that they've worked in. And then another one, a large bank where the management of an area, when they came across these people who were resistant to change, said, I mean, I guess it's kind of similar, but it was like, here's your opportunity to move to a parallel organization not going through this change. You can stop being a pain in our bottom and you can go, sit quietly over there in the corner. So what's your experience of that and how that relates to Integral?
Well, we've talked about that before. So you're talking about, I guess, what we would call like the less healthy version of it. But we've talked about the healthy version of it, which is you take someone who is, perhaps not a cultural fit for where they are, or for whatever reason they're resisting the transformation, and you move them into an area that is supportive of their gifts, right? Because no one is just taking stuff off the table all the time. They've got something to offer. So you move them out of like this innovation style role and you move them into something more risk, compliance, legal, whatever, an area that where those values are worthwhile. What I think I'm hearing you say is you move them off to a part of the organization where the transformation hasn't touched yet. So they're just kind of like biding their time until it gets to them.
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's similar to kind of this idea that we mentioned in the other video of kind of sidestepping the problem. Because what I find is that some of these people are naysayers until they see the writing on the wall. So they're naysayers until it's inevitable that it's going to happen. So they'll do whatever they can to stop it happening, but as soon as they know it's going to happen, they kind of join the party. There's the other, there's the extreme of that position, which are when people realize the writing's on the wall, they just say, well, I'm out. I'm going to leave the whole organization. I haven't seen that happen very often. I know a lot of people threaten that, like I'm never going to work like this. I'm never going to fit in. I'm never going to do this. I'll leave rather than do this. And then, they sometimes find a way to soften that stance.
Well, I think I've seen someone do it, not explicitly, but yeah, there's been I've seen coincidental people leaving at certain time points when certain things were being brought in that, you can't prove for certain. One question I have for you, Lior. So you said before, sometimes you have to kind of say, this is it. The boss has said we have to do it like this. Sorry, get over it. Kind of, you have to get like a mandate. So what I've noticed often is that it's never a transformation isn't one thing that happens. It's a series of steps, and there's different steps along the way. And I don't mind pulling out well, you're just going to have to move over now and deal with it. But that person keeps raising issues over and over again. And most of the time I feel like I've won the battle, but I haven't won the war. And I can say, hey, you have to drop it on this one because we have to start working in sprints now. But then a week later, when it's about, oh, we have to create epics like this, then it's, oh, no, I've got a problem with that. And then you have to struggle with them again, and then you have to get another mandate and put it through, right? And it never ends. How do you decide, how do you win the war in that situation? How do you stop it from having to push through every single thing? Because when you do put your foot down like that, you haven't really changed the situation.
Yeah, you haven't. So it depends on the person's role. I mean, if they're just going to obstruct like that, then I would work on the environment around them to the point where I've gotten everybody else's buy-in to the extent that it's not me against them anymore, and I'm trying to convince them. Their whole world has changed around them, and good luck arguing with everybody else. There's another one, going back to Lucci's original question. There's another scenario. So there's the scenario of, well, they're a skeptic and we can change them. And there's the scenario of they'll never change, and so they're just going to leave. There's another scenario of they're just not going to do it. And in what I described with that amber person in that green culture, they were just like, no, I'm not going to do it. And this was a massive group inside of a gigantic group. We're talking like 200 teams where this one director owned maybe 20 of those teams. And we're talking like a critical part of that group. And the senior leader, like the super duper leader, didn't know what to do. And what she ended up doing was nothing. And so this person was allowed to, because the totality of that group depended on this difficult person's group, and they just let her slow everything down and gum up the works of the transformation because they didn't know what to do. They didn't know the form because they weren't integral. Right. So green, they kind of had that green, we're going to accept everything. And they didn't have that integral, like, no, we're going to get in here and we're going to make a mess, but we're going to fix it.
It's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of different cases where I think you also just have to be case by case basis and try your best to slowly make change. But yeah, I hope at least our conversation has been able to give some insights to some people who might be going through some backlash and some negative feedback and roadblocks. Where there's a will, there's a way, and you can always get through it, right?
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much for the ideas and the conversation. Lucci, Eddie, Ben, thanks again. And for everybody else, like and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you next time.